Have you ever wondered, is my child just strong-willed or is there something more going on? Today, we're going to be unpacking the difference between being strong-willed and neurodivergent and why at the end of the day, your child's identity doesn't come from a label. The most powerful thing you can do as a mama is to learn how to regulate yourself, anchor your identity in Christ, and build connection with your child. Mama, are you tired of meltdowns stealing the peace in your home? Welcome to Parenting Beyond Meltdowns. I'm Amanda, a Christian life coach and a mom of a strong-willed neurospicy teen. If you've tried everything from consequences, parenting books, crying out to the Father, and still feel like you're failing, you're not alone. Inside this podcast, we'll explore how faith, emotional regulation, and connection work together so that you can parent from a place of peace, even in the hardest moments. You don't have to hold it all together here. This is a safe space to lay it all down. Welcome. Before we dive in today, let's read a review from a fellow mama. Mom Saz says, as a parent of a neurodivergent child, now an adult, I can understand the challenges and the joys to be found. I so enjoy how real this podcast is. Amanda speaks from her heart. She shares her vulnerability both as a parent and as a human being. And most of all, she brings her real life experiences to the table, making her and this subject matter relatable. I am so looking forward to hearing more. Thank you so much for these kind words. Your reviews mean the world to me, and they help other moms just like you find the podcast. If you're ready to leave a review, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a quick review. You might hear your name on a future episode. For a really long time, I thought that I just had a strong-willed kid who didn't want to follow the rules and he wanted to do things his own way in his own time. As we got closer to school age, I didn't believe a traditional classroom would be best for him, so we went the homeschool route. We were doing it on our own, and honestly, I was overwhelmed because I was just trying to treat homeschooling like public school at home, and it was just not really working. So we ended up joining a university model program that was half school, like classroom, and half at home. Shortly after that, the lady that ran the program came to us and offered us our money back, explaining that she did not feel like their program was a good fit for our son, and gently offered that we should look into an ADHD diagnosis. At the time, I was so opposed to it because of what I thought a diagnosis represented. Maybe a year or so later, we were at a friend's house and she was paying attention to all the kids playing, and she had noticed when watching my son just some certain behaviors. And so she asked me if there was any sensory processing issues that I was aware of. And so this led me down the rabbit hole of learning about sensory processing and what it all meant, because I had never heard anything about this. When I started learning more about sensory processing disorder, it made a lot of sense because we saw a lot of things happening in my son that showed that he probably indeed did have sensory processing disorder. And so we actually went to get a diagnosis for that. We ended up in occupational therapy, and he graduated after a year or two. And then they told us, but he still really needs to work on listening and obeying, which story of my life. And so basically at the time, I could see that he was bold, determined, and passionate, and he had all these qualities that I knew that God placed in him. And I've always just said that if we can just get to adulthood, that these would all be seen as good qualities. And sometimes in kids, when we see them, we think that it's a bad thing. We also had other things happening like internal meltdowns. So my son was really more of a I shut down kind of person more than outward. And so there was defiance and constant intensity and just all of these things happening. And while some moms might have been wondering, man, am I missing something? I was in complete denial and I didn't want to know anything. I just said he's strong-willed, and that's all I cared about at that time. And I just kept parenting with traditional parenting that I knew, which was completely not what he needed and was completely the opposite of what was helpful to both him and I. But that's all I knew at the time. And I was just trying to truck along, doing the best I could. So there is no condemnation if that is where you are in your journey, because I get it. I believe that as mamas, we have our own journey with the Lord in areas we need to heal and grow before we can be able to show up for our kiddos in the way that they possibly need from us. So here we are years later with several diagnoses under our belt. And what I've come to believe is that whether or not your child is strong-willed or neurodivergent, your role as a mama doesn't change. The foundation is the same. You need to regulate yourself and build connection with your child. I believe that these are the foundation of loving our kids well, whether they're strong-willed or neurodivergent. I'm not here to discourage you from getting a label or a diagnosis. If that is what is best for your family and that's where the Lord is leading you, then I want you to do that. I feel like personally there's pros and cons to both. Like it can be helpful if you're in a public school setting where they then legally have to provide accommodations. Now, I will say that the accommodations that my son has been given in school were not necessarily because of a diagnosis that we sought. The school kind of just diagnosed him with behavioral stuff, and so they kind of had their own rules under that. I do know that when you have specific diagnoses, that you can take things you know about that and implement it into the school setting, but that is not what ours did. And so for me, learning about neurodivergence has helped me to better understand my son. We haven't actually gotten, like, there are things that I've learned about that I didn't actually go get a diagnosis for. There's a diagnosis that I would say my son probably falls under pretty well, but I have not gone to seek diagnosis for that. I have just decided to change how I approach our relationship and to teach him workarounds or how his brain works so that he can then go out into the world. And again, I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that's what I've personally done. I just didn't see the benefit at this point, especially so close to adulthood. I was concerned that diagnoses might actually hurt more than help for the future. And again, I could be wrong on that. This was just my mama instinct with my kiddo. So where we're at now is that I've just adapted to the things that I think are best for him and being able to explain to him why his brain works the way it does. And I now just understand so many little quirks that I didn't understand before that come from this. So at the end of the day, what I want you to know is that your child's identity and yours doesn't come from a label or a diagnosis. It comes from the one that created you and them. So let's break this down a little bit. I want to remind you that this is a very simplistic view. I urge you to dig deeper for yourself. If you're wanting to know more information about neurodivergence and different labels, I would urge you to dig deeper. If this is something that you want me to cover in future episodes, then I would like to know. You can send me an email at amandacalfecoaching@gmail.com. You can also find my email in the show notes because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to talk to you about what you want to hear, not just what I want to talk about. Again, I'm going to just make a disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, so this is literally information from what I know in the internet. And so you can take and do what you want with that information. Strong-willed kids. They say, according to the internet, that the definition has to do with a temperament trait, that these kids are determined, persistent, they're independent, and often resistant to being controlled. That is 100% my child, and I would say myself. Key traits are big emotions, frequent power struggles, pushing back against authority, strong sense of justice, and a desire for autonomy. They say that the why it happens is because it's personality and temperament, and that it's not a disorder or a diagnosis, it's simply how God wired them. One could say that about neurodivergence also. The parenting implications that are that traditional obedience-based approaches tend to backfire and that they need respect, collaboration, and guidance towards emotional regulation. And I will say that all of this fits my kiddo to a T. So for neurodivergent children, by definition, neurodivergence refers to children whose brain processes information, emotions, and the world differently due to conditions like autism, which includes varying levels of functionality, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, Down syndrome, dyscalculia, which is a difficulty with math, dysgraphia, which is a difficulty with writing, dyslexia, difficult with reading, dyspraxia is difficulty with coordination. There's intellectual disabilities, sensory processing disorders, and social anxiety, which is a specific type of anxiety disorder, and Tourette's. The list goes on and on. You can go look in my show notes. I have a list from Cleveland Clinic that shares more. Some of the key traits of neurodivergence can include sensory sensitivities, difficulties with emotional regulation, impulsivity, rigidity, or social and communication struggles, depending on the diagnosis. They say that it happens because of a neurological difference in the brain. This isn't about personality, but about wiring at the neurological level. Parenting implications requires accommodations, understanding of their diagnosis, and approach tailored to how their brain functions. How they overlap. Both strong-willed and neurodivergent kids may appear defiant, oppositional, or hard to parent. Both may trigger power struggles, meltdowns, or overwhelm for moms. Both thrive when moms regulate themselves, build connection, and shift from control to collaboration. The core difference, they say, is that strong willed kids push boundaries because of their personality and temperament. A neurodivergent child struggles because their brain literally processes differently. They say that a child can be strong willed without being neurodivergent, and neurodivergent without being strong willed, or they can be both, which is often the toughest combination. So, as a follower of the Most High King, I do not believe that labels equal identity. And what I've learned over the years is that a diagnosis, the label, the letters, they may give context, they may even open doors to support or resources, but I personally refuse to let them define our identity as a person. There are many in the neurodivergent community that I know will not agree with me. I personally have seen them in Facebook groups taking on their diagnosis as their identity of who they are as a whole person. And I personally attribute this to the assumption that they don't know their true identity comes from the Father. For me, like I said, as a follower of the Most High King, I just can't believe that a diagnosis equals identity. Again, labels can be helpful and they might even explain behavior and open doors to resources, but at the end of the day, they don't define your child. Your child's identity is rooted in Psalms 139, where it says that they are fearfully and wonderfully made. Another thing I want you to look at is a common denominator is you. Let's just be honest. Whether your child is strong willed or neurodivergent, the question is, how am I showing up as a mom? How do I want to show up as a mom? When I regulate myself and create safety for both of us, amazing things happen. When we speak life instead of fear, we're shaping their identity. When we choose connection over control, we're inviting trust. So, some practical tools. At the end of the day, I personally believe that seeking the Father in all things is our best bet. The world may be able to give us answers and tools, but I just don't think we can go wrong with seeking the Father. Before reacting, what if we pause and we take a deep breath and we whisper a prayer that says, Lord, help me to see my child the way you see them? What if you post a sticky note in a place that you'll see it or put it on your phone that says, God made me the perfect mama for my child? What about practicing one small habit of connection a day? For me, with my child, every kid is different, but I'm extra silly with mine. I tell him I love him. I give him hugs and kisses. Now, I will say with some kids, you want to ask first if they want this because they may not actually want that, but mine loves it. He always puts a little smile on his face. Laughter is the key to his heart. I also listen to him talk about things he's interested, like his video games and cars, and then I try to remember details from our conversation so that when I'm talking to him later, I can be like, oh yeah, the T whatever tank. And one day I did that and I actually said the right tank, the T10 or something for his tank game. And he was so shocked that I actually remembered because when he was younger, I didn't listen to him because I just thought, I don't care about this. Why would I listen? And maybe that makes me a horrible person and I'm the only parent that's ever done that. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know this. I don't understand it. I don't want to know it because I just don't need it in my head. But at the end of the day, it's what's important to them. And I have seen that build so much trust in our relationship that I've actually listened to what he's saying and then being able to mirror back to him things he's saying in the future. It's just built so much trust with us. So, at the end of the day, what I want you to remember is that your child's identity is not being the bad kid or the defiant one or their diagnosis. And your identity is not the failing mom. I've said this before and I'm going to say it again. Isaiah 43:1 says, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. I really just want you to hold on to this, that you are his. Your child is his. I'm going to repeat it one more time. You are his. Your child is his. And he doesn't make mistakes. Here's what I want you to walk away with. They say that strong-willed and neurodivergent are different, but I believe the foundation for parenting them is the same. And our role to show up to the relationship regulated and ready to build connection. And that while labels may explain behaviors, they don't have to define our identity. Remember, your child doesn't need a perfect mom. They need you, rooted in faith, anchored in love, showing up as the calm to their chaos. If today's episode gave you a fresh perspective, I'd love to invite you to join me on the Insiders List. It's where I share faith-filled encouragement, emotional regulation tips, and practical tools to help you parent your strong-willed or neurodivergent child with peace and connection. The link is in the show notes. I'd love to see you there. Hey, sweet mama, I hope you loved today's episode. Can you do me a favor? If this episode spoke to your heart, would you take 30 seconds and share it with a mama in your life who needs to know they are not alone? Also, would you leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts for me? It blesses my heart to know that this show is giving you hope in hard moments. All right, I'm off to grab some protein because love and grace flows easier when you're not just running on fumes and coffee. I'll meet you back here next week for another honest and hope-filled conversation. In the meantime, mama, stay rooted in faith and anchored in love.